Alrighty dokie, so it's often said that your early 20s are the best years of your life. I always heard it was late teens/early 20s, and some say it's your 20s in its entirety. The point is, after high school and before your 30s tends to be the prime or peak of your life. Now the reasons depend on who you ask/what you read about it, but the general idea is you don't have school, so you're not shackled to the rigid timetable of schooling. You also probably don't have a family, so there's less responsibilities, which is weird since that implies a family is a net negative on your life. If a family was considered the best part of life, wouldn't your 30s and beyond be your best years? Seems the whole 20s is your peak is a viewpoint that has been echoed by a certain subsection of the population. I'll talk about who I suspect those people are in a follow-up video. So, no school, no family. Generally, you're also at your physical peak. I mean, most people I knew were fitter at 16 to 17 than they are in their 20s, which is when you can legally drive and go to clubs, both of which are the age of 18 here in Victoria, Australia. Example, after you turn 18, you can get your license, which means you can go on Macca's runs. You drink empty calories via alcohol because you go clubbing. You also have more junk food after a night out and more junk the next day after a hangover, as well as the fact you generally aren't playing sport after 18 years old. I played basketball until around 23 years old, but most guys I know stopped playing about a year or two after high school ended. PE also stops becoming mandatory, like that physical education subject in school. That's not required in year 11 or 12 here in Australia, or at least in my state anyway, or at least it was in my school. So there's even less physical exercise in your later teen years. But that's just an observation I made. I'm saying generally people are fitter in their mid-teens than their late teens/early 20s. But the thesis of your 20s are the best years of your life comes from the idea that you're as fit as you'll ever be. You'll be fatter later on in life. It's hard to find exactly where this has come from, since there's countless blogs, articles, videos out there on this topic, but I know what I saw. A big reason was the fact that you're fitter in your 20s as opposed to your later years. Another big thing they talk about is meeting new people, or stuff related to nightclubbing, aka partying, which is a part of the title or thumbnail of this video. I can't decide at this point where I'm going to involve the party thing, but it's a focal point of this video. So there is more to people's reasonings, but let's just keep it simple. The primary reason people say your 20s are the best years of your life are you're fit, you're out of school, you don't have a family, you can party a lot, and you have more free money. Since you aren't in school, meaning you can work more instead of being at school, and you're generally on higher adult wages as opposed to teenage wages, and you don't have a family to provide for. Now, why did I bring that up? The title of the video revolves around whether you should grind or enjoy your 20s, not why your 20s is the best decade of your life. Well, it paints the scene for many points I'll talk about in this video. So this video topic was on my little list of video ideas, but I've decided to make it sooner than I expected, since I'm starting to get this question more often. And no doubt others are thinking it, but haven't said anything to me. The general gist of the questions I get is this worth it? My regulars know I am basically a poster boy for the grind. Obviously, I'm not the only one, but I at least have the receipts/showcase it. For anyone who's new here, briefly, I work 7 days a week across 2 jobs. I study a post-tertiary qualification. I go to the gym 4 nights a week on a standard week, although often there's some stuff that pops up that means I only get to go 2 to 3 nights a week. I listen to finance/stock market info every single day for a few hours at least, as well as swing trading stocks myself. I'm in the midst of building a house, not me personally, but I do have a house being built soon enough. I also have a little side project/brand/business that I'm working on, which is how you're seeing this video. The most grindy part of this is probably the 7-day work schedule, as well as the post-tertiary education. I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. Why keep studying? Why keep grinding? I'll mention that later in this video. So I come across as someone who's always grinding, always working, and some people are wondering whether this is even worth it. Why? Spend your 20s partying. You'll regret this when you're older. Now, I disagree strongly, like Winston Dever from The Incredibles 2. I won't regret this at all. Come back in 7 years and see how much of a better spot I am in then. But I definitely see the other side of the argument. I'm only young once. Isn't there plenty of time to work when I'm older? Well, yes, but actually no. You'll know why if you sit through everything in this video. Obviously, there will be some drop-off in retention as the video goes on, but there are many different points I'll talk about here, so you will miss important points if you just skip to the end, for example. Now, firstly, I'll talk about my grind and why I do it, the alternative option, and why it's worth it in my eyes. Let's start with my career. I work 5 days a week in accounting. This is what I studied at university. Now, let's start by assuming that this would be something that someone who wants to enjoy their 20s would do anyway. You work the rat race wagey 9 to 5, and you party Friday and Saturday nights. Your only real responsibility is your full-time job. Maybe you gym too, since if you've seen my optimal routine video, you'll realize it doesn't take up that much time, and usually there is a handful of party goers that are gym rats too. Like you see that in the fitness industry. They basically just work out a lot and party even more. Anyway, point is, for this, you're only working at your career 40-ish hours a week. In this case, you're still stacking career experience, so you're still making progress each week, each month, each year in your career. If you're working a standard job, like a minimum wage job, you are also gaining experience, but it's just not as valuable as a conventional career, for example. So on top of this 9 to 5 career, I am also studying a post-tertiary qualification, my CPA studies. It's basically an above university/college thing you do for accounting to get better jobs later on. So why am I doing this? The study is grueling. You already did a bachelor's degree. Why keep studying since you've already got a job? Good question. But you're thinking too short-term.
You're thinking too small, you fool!
In my local economy, as in within a reasonable commute time, any accounting-related job that pays over $100,000 requires a CPA. So I can have a decent income of around $80,000 to $90,000 without my CPA, but if I want the 6 figures from a single job, as opposed to my 2 jobs, I'll talk about that later, I need this CPA. So instead of those stressful, anxiety-ridden nights of studying, the pain of the exams, the heartbreak of possible exam failures, I could just simply not study this. Okay, fine. But what about the future? Yes, an $80,000 to $90,000 per year income is decent, at least in my region, but it's only decent for now. Wait until I get to the investor stat. So I'm studying a post-tertiary qualification so I can earn way more in the future, since I'm going to need it. Yes, I do give up a lot of potential parties and whatnot, especially during the 6 weeks leading up to an exam. All of my friends know I don't hang out then. Any hangouts are scheduled for after the exam. Okay, let's say no 9 to 5 job. Wagey, I'm going to start my own thing. Well, when you stop working 40 hours a week for someone else, you will start working 80 hours a week for everyone else. I've talked time and time again about if a business is likely to pay off. Statistically, it won't, especially since most business ideas I've seen have no long-run potential, as I talked about in my Does Hard Work Pay Off video. But I won't talk about it too much here since it'll just make this video way too long. Point is, I doubt whatever business idea most people have will make a decent enough profit. Sometimes people work 60 plus hours a week on their business just to make what a minimum wage worker makes in 20 hours. Like, bro, I know you don't want to work for a boss, but surely it's just more time efficient to work 20 hours a week for someone else rather than 60 hours a week for yourself to earn the same income. But whatever, you do you. But in this case, if you don't have a standard 9 to 5, where's your income? If you really want your business to pay off, you'd be grinding on that thing 24/7. So the whole enjoy your 20s argument wouldn't work here. If you spent minimum time on it, expect minimum results. Yeah, you'd enjoy your 20s, but you're going to have bugger all to show for it in your 30s and beyond. Maybe you could grind then, but you don't get the compound interest effect, which I'll elaborate on later. So to wrap up this section, if you don't have a standard 9 to 5, good luck making a decent enough income whilst also enjoying yourself. If you work a 9 to 5 but don't pursue the extra work involved to get higher pay going forward, suit yourself, but you will be paying for this later on. If you're doing a me and working a 9 to 5 as well as the extra study involved, it will pay off, providing you're studying/training in a useful and in-demand career path, but you do pay for this in your 20s. Next up, money, my 2-job grind. This is probably the most questioned part of my grind. I think collectively as a whole, people question it, but the most glaring part is the 7-day work week, the 2-job grind. So for anyone who's new here, I work 8 to 5 on a Saturday at a supermarket job and 1 till 10 on a Sunday. Basically, full-day shifts at a supermarket on the weekend. Why? Because money, you idiot.
Because money, you idiot.
But is this money worth it? Why not enjoy yourself? Well, this plays more into the investor stat, so I'll save it for later. But I earn about $35,000 a year from working this weekend job. I have to get up to an alarm on a Saturday morning, despite getting up to an alarm Monday to Friday already, and I get home quite late on a Sunday night, as well as giving up the daylight hours on a Saturday and the afternoon/night on a Sunday. Is this worth it for you? Depends. For me, yes, primarily due to the investor stat related outcomes/decisions. But the choice is yours. Even so, I can literally go clubbing on a Saturday night. I finish at 5 p.m. on a Saturday and don't start work again until 1 p.m. on the Sunday. I could easily go clubbing each Saturday night. But is the cost of clubbing itself even worth it? Do you even enjoy it that much? I'll talk about it in the investor stats section, since it also relates to investments and the time value of money. So that was nice and quick, but for the money stat, I give up a good chunk of my weekends for $35,000 per year. Someone who only works one job is forfeiting this $35,000 a year. Your choice is your own, but for me, I'll take the $35K please. If you're wondering why it's so high, the value of the Aussie dollar is sort of weaker than other developed nations, so our minimum wage has a higher nominal amount compared to other countries. But if you flip this currency conversion, our minimum wage probably isn't much higher compared to other developed countries. Even so, the higher minimum wage doesn't mean much with our rent/housing costs. In total, I earn around $126,000 a year from both of these jobs. Maybe you take the choice to earn less and have more time to enjoy your 20s, to each their own, but wait until you see the investor stat. It could change your tune. Next up, aesthetics. Primarily this is gym and diet related, but I'll briefly touch on the other aspects such as dental work, minoxidil, laser hair removal, and Botox. For anyone who's not a frequent viewer/listener of mine, I get dental work done, as in checkups here and there, and I fix any problems as they relate to my teeth. I suppose it's more so a health thing, not an appearance thing, but I still count it here, especially since I plan on getting some teeth whitening done soon anyway, because white teeth look good on most people, especially if you have darker skin, like me. I use minoxidil after brushing my teeth every night. Hardly an intrusive thing, takes like 1.5 minutes, and it's also not even that expensive. I get laser hair removal on my neck, so I have no neck beard. On my body too, so no shaving rashes for when I get my shreds on again. And around my pelvic region, aka no pubes, yucky. And lastly, I get Botox. For some reason, my forehead started to wrinkle really badly, and I noticed it around the age of 24. So I get Botox every few months to basically hide/remove this. However, I assume most people don't refer to everything I've just said when thinking about if grinding in your 20s is worth it. Yes, some of this stuff can be costly. Cough laser, cough Botox, cough dental. And it is a nuisance going to appointments after work instead of going home right after work. But it improves your appearance to the point where it's worth it for me personally. Or at the very least, it maintains the looks that you currently have. So let's talk about gym and diet. Is this worth it? Yes. I heard somewhere some guy was talking about how life was too short to work out. Yeah, life will be short if you don't work out, fatty. Even then, going to the gym doesn't really gobble up that much spare time. I'm presuming most people realize that gym is more beneficial anyway. The part that doesn't seem to be worth it to people is the dieting thing. I'm sure you know at least one person like this. They go to the gym a fair amount, but they have no concept of dieting/calorie control. They're just like a fluffy buff guy. Big arms, fills out a t-shirt easily, but no definition/abs/anything. Is the dieting worth it? Is it worth having abs year-round? Well, no, not year-round, but it is worth being leaner, in my opinion. Me currently, I'm like 18% body fat. I'm getting pretty fat, but it's part of my planned bulk. I won't stay this way perpetually. I will cut back down once I feel I am due for a cut, but that means spending time in a calorie deficit/cutting. This is hard work, and many people don't consider it to be worth it, as you can probably see when you look around in public. I was going to say something further on this relating to mocking body positivity, but I will keep my mouth shut to avoid a shadow ban, and I just recently got monetized, so I don't want to push it. So I have a pretty rigid diet. I eat basically the same thing every day, but I have other foods on top of this if I feel like it/if work has free food in the staff rooms. Free food aside, eating the same thing every day sounds grueling for most people. People at my supermarket job can't fathom it. They couldn't imagine eating the same thing every day. I do this so I can consistently consume the essential vitamins and minerals, but this diet is also pretty cheap. Some people I know at the supermarket will get those microwavable meals for lunch. They cost like $10 each, and my diet as a whole can cost like $15-ish a day, maybe less, maybe more, depending on what price I get certain foods for. But they're spending $10 for a single meal. To each their own, but it's cheaper to just make it at home. The only instance where it's better to buy takeout/microwavable meals is if that time spent cooking could be used to make more money. If I was like overemployed, which is where you have like 2 remote white-collar roles, like those sort of work-from-home jobs. If I was like overemployed with an online bookkeeping role, or had sponsor deadlines for a YouTube video, or could 100% guarantee some profits from stock trading, the time I spent cooking could be utilized better with the other 3 money-making methods. In that case, it's more money efficient to buy takeout food. However, I'm not in a spot like that at the moment. I don't know if I ever will be. So it's more money efficient for me to cook my own meals. Money aside, I know I'm getting the nutrients I require by cooking my own meals. I don't really eat fast food much. I'll have it a handful of times per year. I drive past 2 McDonald's establishments, a KFC and a Hungry Jack's on the highway home each day. I could very easily go into the drive-thru on the way home at one of these places. It'd be so easy, but I abstain from that. It helps my bank account and caloric budget. This can be hard work for some people. Not having nice, tasty foods. Is giving this up worth it for you? Only you can decide that for yourself. So I could have a more lax diet in my 20s rather than grinding away at this diet, but this diet assists me in my gym goals, and it's also cheaper than many other alternatives. So it's also, in a way, helping my bank account too. As for going to the gym itself, it doesn't take up that much extra time, and usually people don't consider gym to be a huge grind, the same way they do with a job. Anyway, regardless, wouldn't you prefer to have a better body anyway? The choice is yours. Now, the main point of a lot of my grind, the investor stat. So earlier, I talked about studying so I can make more than $100,000 from my career gig, and I also talked about making $35,000 a year from my weekend job. Why do you need this money? Yeah, money is nice, but the full-time accounting job pays enough for you to enjoy yourself. Why study more? Why work more? Why grind instead of enjoying your 20s? Well, simple. It's due to the concept of the time value of money. Would you rather $50,000 today or $50,000 50 years ago? Correct, you'd rather it 50 years ago. Why? Because it could have paid, or at least almost paid off a house outright. Nowadays, $50,000 isn't even enough for a down payment in many cases. This is not going to get better, it's going to get worse. It's quite literally how the financial system is designed. The currency is designed to devalue over time, thus pushing up the prices of everything. So the more you make now, the better. This is why I work the second job. I've worked both jobs since 2021. I did have a stint of a 7-day work week in late 2019/early 2020. Story for another video, but for the sake of this one, let's keep it simple and say I earned $30,000 a year from my second job each year. In 2021, I was on a lower amount since some recent minimum wage increases hadn't kicked in yet, but I worked some extra nights here and there, so I made around $30,000 in 2021 from that supermarket job. In 2022, I got some decent back pay from some underpayment thing in prior years, so that extra almost $5,000 boosted me above $30,000. But again, let's keep it simple. And same deal with 2023. I earned about $30,000 from the weekend job. In those 3 years, I made more than $90,000, and the time went by just as fast or just as slow. Yeah, there was obviously some taxes and retirement funding in there, but the point stands, I made $90,000 over 3 years from just working on the weekends. What did I do with that money? I used it for a down payment on a house. Well, I'm going to anyway. Without this extra deposit, I won't have the down payment required for my house. I could afford something on a smaller block of land, a smaller house with less bedrooms and in a worse area on my accounting income alone, but I couldn't afford my current place without my supermarket job income. There is also the serviceability of the loan. Basically, at the moment here in Australia, the banks will lend you roughly 5 times your gross annual income to get a house. 5 times my 2025 financial year income of $80,000 is $400,000. This is not enough to get me a loan of what I need. And plus, mine isn't as high as 5 times since my student debt drags it down slightly. However, 5 times my annual income with my supermarket job included means I can borrow around $550,000. This, coupled with my down payment, which a good chunk of that is thanks to the supermarket job, means I can afford this house. So my supermarket job has basically gotten me into the real estate market. I'll talk more about how good of an investment this house is in the future, but basically I project at least $132,000 in equity before I'm ready to buy my second property. This honestly may be even higher. It might be around $150,000 after some extra repayments and another year of capital appreciation by the time I'm ready for property 2. And the rental income I am projected to receive can literally pay off my mortgage. I could be living in my own home for free. Yes, I'd be living with others, but I don't need 2 lounge rooms, another bathroom, and 3 other bedrooms anyway. Now, quickly, the post-tertiary studies, it's the same sort of thing. As the value of money depreciates, I'm going to need more of it to get by in the future. That's where the extra study comes in. It increases my labor market value, whereby I can earn more per hour of my time, rather than just working more hours overall. Since there's only 168 hours in a week, you can't work 170 hours in a week. Upskilling yourself to increase the earning potential for the future is worth it for me, even if I have to grind in my 20s instead of partying. Okay, so back to the house. Think about it. Would you forfeit this investment /asset /house to enjoy your 20s a little bit more? You could argue, well, I'll just go and get that house in the future. I'll grind in my 30s and enjoy my 20s. No. Let's run through some current day prices for this exact size block of land in this area that I bought, as well as the current costs to build this house. The land is roughly valued at $390,000 at the moment. I locked in a price of $325,000. Thanks, InvestorStat. My career or money stat didn't get me to pick out this investment, my InvestorStat did. Another reason why it's an important stat in the game of life. It'll obviously only be valued more in the future. The best investment in Australia is probably land, to be honest. Now, as for the house itself, if I got a builder to build this exact same build, it would cost at least $310,000. Reason is, there's new legislation in my state that says houses must be built with certain qualities, such as a 7-star energy rating, railings on walls, double-glazed windows, etc. Point is, it's more expensive to build the same house, despite it still having the same 4 beds, 2 baths, 2-car garage, 2 lounges, and 1 outdoor living. So that's a total cost of $700,000. Now, given my projected deposit of around $160,000, that means if I was to buy this at today's prices, I'd need a loan of $540,000. Well, thankfully, I'm on $110,000-ish as a base amount. This amount doesn't include any retirement fund benefits or anything else. So I can get a loan around $550,000. That is assuming the student loans don't hinder my ability to borrow this maximum amount. And that's also assuming interest rates don't increase further, which would mean I could only borrow even less than this $550,000. Okay, so without this InvestorStat knowledge, without taking the time to listen to stock market/economic related information for a few hours each day for years, I would have missed something like this, meaning I'd be buying into the market at this current price of $700,000. Let's just assume I could afford this. Keep in mind the student debt would result in me not being able to borrow the full $550,000 or $540,000 that I need. My mortgage repayments are now substantially more than they were if I locked in the lower price, because obviously the more money you borrow from a bank, the more you need to pay back. Now, this repayment means my rental income no longer pays for itself. Yes, the rental income is still good, but I'm no longer basically being paid to live in my own home. So that's why listening to the stock market/economic information daily pays off. Like, it literally pays off. Without slowly gathering these tidbits over the years, I wouldn't have seen this coming. But because I did, that hard work in my 20s sussing the investment scene has now benefited me for the rest of my life. And that's primarily just real estate. There is also obviously the stock market. By understanding stock trends, you can gather a portfolio that beats the market, or skew your investment portfolio towards better investments like I have. Or at least, I think. NVIDIA's just been carrying the S&P 500 this year, so...
It's contributed 183 points to the 475 points that the S&P 500 has gained this year. And when we look at what the market would really be up, it'd be up 292 points divided by the 469 it started the year at. It would only be up 6.1% on the year versus the 10% increase. So NVIDIA itself is responsible for nearly 4 percentage points of the gain in the S&P 500 that we've seen so far this year.
Maybe my portfolio isn't actually beating the market this year, but I mean, my portfolio was for the future, not so much this year. But anyway, you get what I mean. Sussing this investor stuff helps you make more money. So let's swing back to this house, and let's assume I grind in my 20s sussing investment-related info each day, rather than just listening to entertainment podcasts. Yes, that would have made each day more enjoyable, but now I'd be unequipped with this knowledge. The choice is yours as to whether you think this info is worth it or not. I'd strongly say it is, as you've just seen with this real estate investment and the money I've saved by picking a good investment at a good time. But anyway, let's say you're in your 20s, you do the InvestorStat thing like I recommend, and you're aware of this great investment. However, you prefer to enjoy your weekends, so now you don't have this second job. So now you have $30,000 less in income and $30,000 less in savings per year. Now what happens to your house? You locked in the lower price thanks to your hard work at the InvestorStat, but you didn't do the 2-job grind. Now what happens? I'll tell you. Now you can't afford this house. Here's why. I'm assuming you're on an income of $80,000 as a base like I am. Well, I actually only recently got this. For a while, I was in the high 50s, and I was on 70K last financial year, which is stuff I had talked about in my I lost 40K in 3 years from not job hopping video. But even so, $80,000 times 5 for the borrowing capacity equals $400,000. Not enough to get the loan required. If you had worked the second job, you'd have an extra $30,000 in income per year. The $30,000 times 5 for the borrowing capacity equals an extra $150,000 in borrowing power from the bank. So instead of borrowing $400,000 from one job, you can borrow $550,000 from both jobs. Plenty enough to afford this. But in this case, you don't work the second job, so you can only borrow $400,000. Not enough for the house/land. Okay, but maybe we have enough of a deposit to cover us instead. If we can't borrow the amount required from the bank, maybe we have enough of a deposit. Oh, whoops. No, we don't, since we didn't work a second job in the last 3 years. Instead, we enjoyed our 20s. Let's say we saved $20,000 a year from the second job. Since there's obviously some taxes involved with the $30,000 I made each year, and no, I didn't spend any extra thanks to the extra income from the job. I wasn't impacted by lifestyle creep. If you were, then that just makes this example even worse. So $20,000 saved per year from job 2 times 3 years equals $60,000 saved. So reduce your down payment by $60,000 if you didn't work this second job. So now my projected deposit of $160,000 is now slashed to $100,000. So, even in my case, if I quit the second job right now, I still have a decent deposit, but I don't have the serviceability required from the bank, since without this extra $30K in income, now I can only borrow $400,000 from the bank, whereas I'm going to need around $440,000, which I could borrow if I had the second job. Let's flip this. If I suddenly decided to work a second job now, but I hadn't been working a second job in the last 3 years, yes, now I can borrow $550,000 from the bank, but I have $60,000 less as a deposit because I didn't work the second job the last 3 years, meaning I need to borrow a lot more from the bank, meaning my house no longer pays for itself because my mortgage is a lot larger, meaning my weekly repayments are a lot higher, meaning my rental income doesn't exceed my weekly repayments for the house. So this is why the second job is here. It gets me into a great real estate investment, since without it, I can't afford this. A counter argument is just work a job that pays enough in the first place. Like instead of working 2 jobs to have a 110K base, just work 1 job with a 110K base. Okay, where? I can get those jobs in the future once I have more experience or after enough study, like my example earlier with the 100K plus accounting income. But this income is in the future. Guess what? Houses are only going to be more expensive in the future, as I already showed. My land would cost around $390,000 at the moment. I bought it for $325,000. My house cost me around $270,000. If you bought the house now, it'd cost at least $310,000 to build. And this was also one of the more cheaper home builders. Some of the houses I saw cost $320,000 earlier in January when I was looking with my friend, meaning they'd cost around $350,000 for a similar design now. So yes, you can earn more in the future, like I will thanks to my post-tertiary studies, but by then, houses will only be more expensive. So by working more hours at a second job and gathering more income now, and checking finance/economic information, you can pick up on these things before they become more expensive. And thankfully, I won't need to work 7 days a week in the future, since I gathered more income earlier on, coupled with my investor stat, I managed to snag the most expensive cost, aka shelter, at a lower price. And thanks to my investor stat, this also pays for itself. So to briefly summarize that whole section, instead of listening to entertainment podcasts/music, I spend at least a few hours each day listening to stock market / economic related information. That knowledge has obviously helped me with real estate decisions, as well as enhancing trading information for the stock market. Having the secondary job also increases my savings, aka my down payment / deposit for the house, as well as allowing me to borrow more income from the bank. These in turn allow me to buy a house that can basically pay itself off. This is not something that will be feasible in 5+ years' time. Now, if you're 10+ years older than I am, I'm 27 at the time of making this video for reference, you probably could have gotten away with partying in your 20s and grinding in your 30s, since real estate prices weren't as whack 10+ years ago. However, at this point, I doubt you'd be able to replicate something like what I'm doing when you're 35+ years old. This video is obviously for the younger generations, but just know, the example I gave before can be countered by people in their 40s saying, "No, I did nothing in my 20s, I worked hard in my 30s and got the same outcome as you." Well, your economic environment was much cheaper than the current economy. And again, as I said before, real estate prices will only increase as the years go on. Maybe apartments / units won't increase in price much, so you can always just buy them later on.
But a lifeless concrete jungle that was never planned correctly.
If you've ever seen a map of Docklands, this U-shaped area here is just riddled and lined with apartments. And it's the perfect example of where supply, which is the number of apartments, does not meet the amount of demand that's currently in the area. And if we take a look at a recent sale in January of 2024, this 1x1 apartment in Docklands sold for about $480,000. If you bought that property in 2002 for $385,000, you would have made exactly $100,000, which for some people is actually not bad money. But if you think about it, Australian property grows on average 6.8% every single year. So that property that you bought in 2002, if you sold it in 2024, it should have been worth at least $1.6 million. And this is the reason why I do not like buying apartments, especially in oversaturated areas. What I would have done instead is this. This house in Queensland recently sold 3 months after for $1.1 million. If instead we took that $385,000 property and bought this property instead in February of 2003, which is a house, for $255,000, we would have made over $900,000, compared to making only $100,000 in that similar time frame. And don't forget, the holding cost of an apartment is not cheap as well. When you have to pay body corporate and strata fees, these things do add up over time.
But they don't have the capital growth or rental income benefits that my house on land does. You will see how good of an investment this house thing is in 7+ years. Watch this space. Now, don't get spooked out either. Yes, house costs are crazy, but at least you're aware of it. And now you can start taking actions to prepare for it. Before the age of 24, I had no clue about any of this stuff. I had briefly heard that houses roughly double in price every 10 years when I was in year 8. This was like 2010 when I was in year 8. But that's it. I was like, I'll worry about that when I'm older. And suddenly I was older, and now it's current me's problem. Not future me's problem, because future me is now current me. I could have had a strategy like this when houses were cheaper years ago, if I had been made aware of this stuff, and it would have been much easier, but instead I pissed away too much of my very early 20s, and I'm in a way paying for it now. Third last point before we move on, I had said before about how apartments / units won't increase in price as much as houses on land do, which is correct. So if your sole purpose is just to use an apartment / unit to live in, that's fine. The point of view I'm coming from is from an investment. Apartments won't have the same investment capabilities that my house on land has, but you can still live in it, and the price of apartments won't increase that quickly. So if you want somewhere to live, and you're in your early teens / early 20s, you will be able to afford a place to live as long as you actually get a decent income and that place to live is an apartment. But it just doesn't have the investment capabilities that my house does. Hence why I'm doing this 2-job grind now. I could easily afford my own apartment on my accounting income alone, so I don't want to spook you out too much. You will be able to afford an apartment / unit if you have decent income from a career job, but it's super unlikely you'll be able to replicate a strategy like mine in 5+ years, the way house and land prices are going. Second last point, I live in Australia. I have a pretty good idea of the trajectory of the housing market here, but I don't know much about elsewhere. Maybe house/land prices stay down for the coming years in your country, meaning you can buy a house on land with one income later on, and the capital growth won't increase as much in the next few years. So there goes the equity component of your investment. I don't know. You'll have to do your own homework on your country, but if you're from Australia, you can fact check me, but every single property investor/buyer's agent has been saying the same thing. And these guys live and breathe property. And even so, the fundamentals behind housing all point towards house prices on land going up, but apartment values staying relatively the same. They'll increase a little bit, sure, but they're not going to rapidly increase the same way land and houses have. Last point before we move on, living with someone else/two people working, or a relationship. You could almost replicate my strategy off one income if you had a partner who also worked. Example, let's say my 80K base accounting income, and then I had a partner who makes even $60,000. That's $140,000 combined, more than my $110,000 base. You'd get the loan for this easily. I'd also assume you'd have the same sort of deposit as me, if not most likely a lot more. Well, if this was the case, you could replicate my strategy off one income, providing tenants have no issue with living with another couple. Generally, they'll be fine with living with one other person, as in like one landlord, not like a couple, if that makes sense. So in this case, you'd be able to copy my investment strategy without working the two jobs or even the extra study. So a relationship could be a fantastic strategy. Let's just pretend that this is a financial only decision, right? Let's ignore like the feelings for each other and whatnot. Looking at it purely from like a money guy's perspective, right? So sounds good, right? Well, two main issues. There's other issues, but I'll only talk about two for this video. One, finding a partner that is on board with this. I know a number of couples who live in 3 to 4 bedroom houses together, but they don't rent it out. Why? Well, in some cases, tenants prefer not to live with another couple, but in this rental crisis in Australia, that's most likely not the main reason. The main reason is usually people in a relationship don't want to live with others. It makes it awkward when you have arguments, and sometimes you dirty rascals want to have your kinky fun stuff on the kitchen table or something. Probably not something you'd do if you lived with others, hey. So in this case, yes, you'd both have the income to pull off a strategy like this, but usually you'd rather not have strangers living in your own home if you're a couple. A counter argument to this is, well, have one house, then just buy another for the same strategy. Well, kinda. The reason my house pays for itself is because I had a huge deposit and the rental income covers my loan repayments, which are smaller than the usual due to my huge deposit. My rental income is higher than the usual market rate because I'd have 3 separate rental agreements as opposed to one rental agreement that covers the whole house. It's cheaper for the tenants since they'd opt for paying like, I don't know, $210 to $250 a week, most likely more, but my current estimates are conservative, as opposed to paying like $550 a week for a whole place of their own. So if you bought a place and rented it out this way, your rental repayments wouldn't cover your mortgage. Rental income of $550-ish and mortgage repayments of $600-ish, not quite covering it. Plus, if you did this strategy and you didn't live in the house and you rented out the whole thing, where are you going to live? You'd have to save up again yourself. So now your investment property doesn't quite pay for itself since you have a rental agreement for the whole house, not individual rooms, and you also don't have your own place to live. My strategy has me living in the same house that I have a huge deposit for, as well as separate rental agreements to increase the rental income I get overall, since I can't rent out the whole house anyway since I'm living in it. So if you were to buy your own place with your partner, then use a separate house for this strategy, you'd still have to pay for where you're living, whereas in my case, I'm not paying anything out of my own pocket for where I live, since I'm living in that same property that I used the huge deposit and had the separate rental agreements for. A counter argument is using separate rental agreements for an entire house. Like instead of my 4-bedroom house being rented as a whole, or using 3 separate rental agreements for the 3 spare bedrooms and me living in the remaining bedroom, like what my current plan is, what if you got 4 separate rental agreements for a 4-bedroom place? Yeah, okay, now that would pay off the place, but generally you don't do those 4 separate rental agreements for an investment property you're not living in for various reasons. Usually it's more risky. You're not in the property yourself to maintain/keep control of things. There's reasons like that and others that I can talk about more another time, but even then, that still doesn't solve the problem of where you're going to live. If you do a strategy like this with a partner, which means you don't need to work the second job or do the extra study, you'd still have to find a place for your own. So you wouldn't be getting paid to live in your own house like I will be, since I don't have a partner, and thus there's no one else I need to convince. And there's also no extra desire for me to have my own space to myself and someone else all the time. I'll be content in my master bedroom. The basic premise of my strategy is I'm being paid to live in my own place. It's kind of like what I've seen with some American real estate investors do with a duplex, but instead of another person living in the other half/unit, it's others living in the other bedrooms. Now, the second main issue as to why this strategy may not work with another person is a relationship breakdown. If you and your partner split up, you have to sell off the assets. In some cases, they'll just kick one person out of the place. It's statistically going to be the male, but the point is, you have someone else your income/finances/assets are tied to, and you have to gamble that the relationship won't go sour. In my case, since there's no one else I can rely on, there's no one else I can blame. Seto Kaiba mentality.
Since there's no one else that I rely on, there's no one else that I can blame.
What I'm saying is, you could have the best strategy in the world for this real estate investment. If part of it relies on someone else, now you've got another factor to worry about, another human being's emotions. That's way more unpredictable and volatile than any economic factors, if you ask me. Relying on someone else can be a positive. Example, if you lose your job, you have another income to keep you afloat, at least for a little bit. In my case, I only have myself to rely on. One of my old managers at my old supermarket job got made redundant. The supermarket had some restructure and his role got made redundant, so he had to rely on his wife's income for a bit. He was most likely going to be made redundant. He ended up getting another role later on because someone else actually denied the role that they were expected to accept, so they just took a redundancy payment instead. That guy who was going to be made redundant took that job instead, but they were planning on how they were going to survive, and his wife was a nurse, so he had that backup in the meantime. So stuff like that obviously can be a big help. But there's also obviously the other negative side of it. There's always 2 sides to the argument. It's no surprise that the accountant single guy has a more pessimistic view of it, hey. But anyway, I have stable jobs/stable skill sets and enough backup income, so I wouldn't need to worry about this much, if at all. And by that I mean my real estate investment going south. I only have to rely on myself and economic factors, and I know with my skill set I can probably rely on both, since I know enough about the economic factors to have a rough guideline of where the real estate market is headed, and I'm confident enough in my own skills to know that I'll be fine. Case in point, replicating my strategy with another person means you have another person to worry about. In my personal case, yes, it's harder since I need to work more/have less safety nets, but I also have no extra roadblocks for the future. I can't lose my stuff in a divorce/de facto couple breakup if I have no partner. I will talk more about finances with a partner and the pros and cons another time, but this video is already way too long. This is going to be a pain in the ass to edit. Okay, moving on. Next up, should you grind at a business/brand in your 20s, or worry about that later? Well, this is like the compound interest effect. The earlier you get in, the better. The competition for most stuff usually only increases as you go on. The longer it takes your business to get running, the more likely your potential clientele is going to be poached by another person whose business is already up and running. You could be the best home builder out there, but if your business starts in 2025, too late, I've already signed up with my home builder. You could be cheaper, better, offer better promotions. Sorry, I'm already taken. My business has been taken by another company. Let's use YouTube channels as an example. I hate calling this a business, but I guess it technically is, and it's the example most of you guys are probably familiar with anyway. So channels that started 10 years ago often have more subs than channels that started around 2 years ago, providing they were consistent with uploads and whatnot. Obviously, there are some outliers, but as a whole, the earlier you start, the more subs you'll have in the future. Like in 2025, maybe I'll have like 2,000 subs in 2025, but if I started my channel in 2015, maybe I could have had 10,000 plus subs, since I had all those extra years of potential eyeballs and exposure. Like, yeah, I didn't have the knowledge or whatnot I have now, but the point stands, generally the earlier you start, the better. Also, as I've said in prior videos, how likely is a business to pay off? Are you going to take this gamble when you're in your 30s, when you have less time for mistakes / need money more urgently? If you're 20, spend 5 years at a business, it goes nowhere, you give up, at least you're only 25. That's still quite young, actually. When you're 35, yes, I still think you're kind of young, but you have much less leeway for mistakes by then. I've always suggested doing a business on the side of a main income, but if you must insist on starting a business as your main gig, you're better off trying that in your 20s as opposed to your 30s. I'll talk more in the future about, I guess, the feasibility of this. It's like if you start a business when you're 20, what exactly do you know and what skills do you have that would be in demand from other people? But again, I'll talk about it in the future because this video is already too long. Now, in my case, recently, I have become ad monetized. Hooray! So, providing I don't get too controversial, I at least have some side income from this in my 30s. Meanwhile, someone else who enjoyed their 20s would only be just getting started with something like this. Maybe this YouTube AdSense money pays for my groceries. So, free groceries in my 30s, thanks to something I worked at in my 20s. Who knows? What I do know is you get the compound interest effect from a business in your 20s, and you have some room for error. The compounding effect isn't as great in your 30s, and you have less margin for error at that age, since you'd probably have to pay for your own shelter by then, whether that be a mortgage or rent. You could live with your parents / guardians in your 30s, your choice, and that is becoming more normal in this current economy, but generally you'd rather have your own place by then. So me working hard in my 20s on my business, aka my brand, has been worth it for me, as I'm already ad monetized before I've even turned 30. So now I'll have extra income flowing in, albeit not that much, whereas I'd have none of that when I'm 30 if I decided to start my brand when I was in my 30s. Alright, so those were some key areas in life and whether it was worth working hard at them or not. Hope it paints the picture as to why I do what I do. Although you obviously have seen some results thus far, I am not done with my CPA studies. I don't have that high-paying finance manager job yet. My house isn't even built. I am not that good of a stock trader, and my channel barely generates much income at all. So all this hard work in my 20s hasn't really shown the great results you'd think it would have by now. There are some results like my income, physique, exam progress, YouTube subs, and stock portfolio performances, stock indicators, house progress, etc. that have shown up, but there's no grand prizes yet. But come back in 5 years, and you'll see how me working hard in my 20s in all these areas has paid off, and I now have the grand prizes like my CPA qualification, my house, etc. So what I was going to do was react to some other articles saying about how your 20s are the best years of your life. However, I'll save that for a future video since this one is already plenty long enough. Everything I've listed in this video is a reason why I'm working hard in my 20s. The compounding effects now will drastically improve my future. I believe your 30s are your best years. And who knows, maybe when I get to my 30s, I'll believe your 40s are your best years. I'd rather work 7 days a week now to be able to afford my own house in my 20s, rather than working 7 days a week to barely afford rent in my 50s. What are your thoughts? Would you still prefer to relax more in your 20s? Or do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. That is all.